But you guys did a talk this week about kind of an intro to car hacking here at RSA.
Yeah.
You ever think that was going to be a thing 2, 3, 5 years ago?
Yeah, not really. We just were like, hey, this is going to be a cool project. We like hacking stuff, and cars were neat. So it's really it's different to see it go into like a whole kind of industry.
But the fascinating thing, I mean, if you followed your story at all a couple of years ago, when you introduced the car hacking stuff publicly, you needed kind of proximity access to the car, and then last year it ramped up to remote access. You could do it remotely. That kind of acceleration, did you guys expect that, and where does it go from there?
Yeah, we originally did the first research to see if you could just send messages on a car to physically control things. We knew they could be remotely attacked because the researchers from the University of Washington did it in like 2011. So we wanted to see all the stuff that you could do in totality. So we knew we were going to do it remote eventually. Yeah. It just took some time.
Yeah. And that's another point too that you guys are pretty clear about. I mean, you weren't the first ones. You're not the only ones to do this. I mean, what's the breadth of this as it goes forward? I mean, what's left?
I don't know. All the cars are different, and they work on different communication networks, and no one really has a set of standardized things. So you can't say with be definitive by saying we did the Jeep and that's how all cars work. You have to look at each one. So other people should do it.
Right. So I saw you do a talk in the Boston area a few months ago where you mentioned this idea of kind of low-impact hacking having kind of a long-term effect. You even gave it an example of some research I think you were involved with or knew somebody did on a Furby.
Yeah.
And, basically how, that kind of research can turn into tomorrow's SCADA attack. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Go into it a little bit.
Sure. I mean, the impact of hacking a Furby is not high, but it's cool. Michael Coppola did the research. But when you start to learn how to take apart devices and disassemble firmware that's just a binary blob and dealing with microprocessors, it translates to cars or SCADA or TVs or whatever it may be. So you get to learn the skills on something that doesn't cost a lot and then kind of graduate to bigger and better things.
What worries you about the fact that we're connecting everything? I know that's a huge question, but...
I mean, it's not. It doesn't worry me. It's just you really want people to think about security when you connect all this stuff, because a lot of it was designed before security was even a thought. So you have these legacy systems and they kind of just slap internet on it. So that's like the worst case scenario. When they're building new stuff, I think they're more conscious of security. So it's really the legacy things that are having internet added to it, which is most concerning.
Right. So. I mean, now with IoT, I mean, back in the day with mobile, you always hear about building security in from the start, kind of. It's a cliche. Is it a fallacy? Is that even possible? I mean,
it depends what your resources are. Do you have the personnel and the money to do such things? Yeah, I mean, I think Microsoft's shown that they can up security game, right? Apple and everyone else. So you just have to have buy-in from the top level and tell you that you have to spend time and money on this because it's concerning.
So we mentioned, obviously, your car hacking work led to a massive recall. Does that kind of get lost in the whole bug hunting thing where, everybody wants to find the bug, everybody wants, whatever notoriety comes with it, but there has to be an end to it. There has to be a fix to it. I mean,
I mean, we like bug hunting, we like writing exploits, but in the end, you want things to get fixed because you don't want someone to be able to do what you proved you can do. So the end game is get things fixed and make things better, especially when it comes to things like cars, right? Because I like cars, I drive a car, I want them to be secure, so hopefully this makes them better.
Did you ever anticipate this transition in security that we're having where it's not just about patching servers anymore? I mean, you're talking about things that involve physical safety. You're talking about things that are connected in our homes, critical infrastructure, whatever it is. What was that turning point? I mean, did you anticipate this? Could anybody have?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. I was always focused on Microsoft stuff for ages, and then I just wanted to do something different. And doing the car stuff made me realize that there's a much broader spectrum of things that we need to have security concerns.
So you've been, like you said, you've been getting stuff patched for a long time. how gratifying was the recall and the fact that you got stuff fixed, not just that it was a big number and a big company.
Yeah, that was absolutely the best, right? Because, I mean, the recall was huge, and it was a software bug that involved physical safety. So having something like that fixed is massive. Like, it feels good to actually make a difference where it's usually just a software patch and it kind of disappears after a month.
So what kinds of questions, what kinds of concerns are you hearing now from that industry in terms of, okay, it's a problem, there are problems out there that maybe they didn't anticipate. Do they have the mechanisms in place to accept the work that you're doing and triage it and ultimately take care of it?
Yeah, it's hard to say because there's little transparency kind of into the automotive industry as opposed to, InfoSec. So it's hard to see what they're doing. Additionally, it's probably hard to staff, right? Like your Facebooks, your Twitters, your Ubers of the world have a hard enough time hiring qualified security personnel. I'm sure it's even harder when you're GM or Fiat Chrysler or BMW or whoever.
And that lack of transparency, excuse me, that kind of harkens back to the early days of software patching too, and I guess eventually that'll kind of work itself out as well.
Yeah, I hope they learn the lessons from people like Microsoft, right, who used to kind of condemn researchers, and now they're paying them if they find something good. So hopefully that takes less time for them to realize that that's the way it should work.
We had Bruce Schneier up here yesterday for a few minutes as well, and he was talking about this shift that we've talked about too, from patching bits to things that impact physical security. Talk about some of the challenges there in that respect. Does that change your focus at all? I mean, what?
If you're fixing them, it's harder, right? Because a lot of these things have internet capabilities built in, but they don't have the ability to patch it over the air, right? Just like the Jeeps. So you're having to release patches if you release a patch and then try to physically get stuff back. Windows Update didn't have the impact it does until it auto-updated without user knowing, right? Until you get to that point, patching is going to be really difficult.
And you're also putting it to a degree in the user's hands, which often doesn't have the best.
Yeah, I don't think that ever works, right? You can't leave it up to the user.
So just to close, a couple of big picture questions. And I've been asking almost everybody that's been up here this week, privacy and security, for example, no longer separate disciplines. You've got Apple and the FBI kind of banging heads at each other. It's a pretty interesting time in security and privacy. From a historical perspective, how do you think this point in time is going to be judged? How do you characterize it? It's a big question.
I think for stuff like cars and devices and factories, like we're just in the baby stages of what we're going to see, right? Like there's only was a few of us doing car hacking not only a couple years ago, and now more people are doing it. So you're going to have a broader range of problems pop up. So I think they'll look back and be like, yeah, that was the start of it, and hopefully it continues to get better over time.
Is this point in time comparable to anything else that you've experienced in terms of getting stuff fixed and the response to it? I mean, there's certain industries or certain aspects in an infancy right now that, compared to others that are pretty mature.
Yeah, I mean, general InfoSec's pretty good with crediting researchers and getting things fixed and not trying to sue them or freeze them. So that's good, but there's other industries, maybe automotive one, that are less accepting that third-party people like me are going to look at their stuff and tell them how it's broken.
So just as a final thought, too, you mentioned that, I mean, just big picture again overall for research, you've got things like Wassenaar, you've got other challenges to the work that folks like you do. Does that enter into your mind now? Do you think twice about it? Am I going to get sued? Am I going to go to jail if I end up doing something I shouldn't?
Not really, right? You're going to do it. Like, that's a hacker mentality. You're just going to do it. But that being said, we'll email the EFF before we do something crazy and be like, hey, is this going to land us in jail? Because face is pretty. I can't go to jail.
You do not want to go to jail. All right, let's leave it there. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. How about a hand for Chris?